welcome to our webinar, the MBA Interview, the Interviewer's Perspective. My name is Nelly and I'll be the moderator on behalf of UniMy Prep team. And I'm here with a very special guest and one of my favorite speakers, Dr. Don Martin, founder of Grad School Road Map. Don has extensive experience working with MBA candidates and he has prepared today a very interesting session for us. I can't wait to hear what he has to share with us, but before that, to everyone who is listening, you can ask questions anytime during the webinar. All questions are welcome. Just use the Q&A box or the chat box. I think everything is said now, Don, so I'm giving the word to you.
Nelly, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this. I'm a bit sad today. This is the last webinar I'm going to have the privilege of doing with UniMy Prep in 2022, but I'm hoping to be back in 2023. But I'm particularly excited about these two webinars that we have chosen to close out this series this year. I don't recall ever doing a webinar strictly on the interview process, and nor have I done a webinar about the interviewer, the person asking the questions. This is a first, and this is a very exciting agenda that we have to share with you. So let me get to that in just a minute, but I will share a little bit with you. You've probably, whoops, excuse me just a moment. I pushed the wrong button. There we go. This is just a slide for those of you that are joining us for the first time. This provides a little bit of information for you about my background. I've been very fortunate to have a career in higher education and specifically in the business school and graduate school admissions arena. I've loved just about every minute of it. And one last thing I'll mention here, just like you, I was one time a prospective graduate student. In fact, I was one twice. I have a Master of Arts degree and a PhD. So I've sat where you are contemplating all of this. And for some of you now who've joined us today, you may actually be at the point where you've applied. You've submitted some of your MBA applications. Maybe you have received an interview invitation or you're about to. So last week, we talked about the interview from the perspective of the interviewee, the person conducting the being interviewed, should I say. And today I'm going to review that briefly before we get into the main topic, which is the interviewer. And we're going to talk about the person who's going to interview you, what they might be doing beforehand to prepare, some things they might be doing during the interview, and what they might do afterward. Then I'm going to cover some of the main questions that are usually asked in an application interview. And then for the very first time ever in Grad School Road Map history, we're going to actually do a mock interview, and I'm going to be the interviewee. I will be introducing you to a colleague of mine when we get to that point, who's going to serve as the interviewer. And that person is going to ask me five or six questions, and I'm going to answer them as if I'm being the interviewee. Then we're going to talk briefly about my book. And lastly, for those of you who've joined us before, you know that this is the favorite part of all of the webinars I ever do, and that is Q&A. How can we help you? So there's a Q&A box on the platform here that we're on today. If you have any questions at any time about anything I say or even something I don't talk about that you would like to ask me, you feel free to put those questions in the box. Nelly has graciously agreed to ask us those questions at the end, and we'll cover as many as we possibly can for you. So don't be shy about asking your questions. I love them. Okay, let's get started with our interview. Very quickly, what is Grad School Road Map? Well, we are a boutique grad school admission consultancy, really. We basically provide information for individuals who are considering master's degree, MBA, law school, medical school, or doctoral programs. And as you'll see, over the past 14 years since we were founded in 2008. We've had the privilege of working with just over 700 individual applicants. That's one of the services we offer. And 97% of them have been admitted to one or more of their top graduate school choices. It's been an absolutely phenomenal opportunity to work with Grad School Road Map. But so just so you have a little bit of background, that's who we are, we do. Now, let's move to a review of last week's webinar, during which we talked about the interviewee, the person who is going to be interviewed, i.e. you. So I spent the entire webinar providing several tips, suggestions for you, and that is available on the Unimi Prep website, by the way. That's a resource that you would be able to access. But for today, let me just give you a quick review of some of the main tips or items I discussed last week for you to keep in mind. Remember, you need to be prepared as much as possible. You need to know about this particular business school. You need to be ready, especially because one of the things you're going to be asked most likely is, why are you interested in our business school? Why have you, you'll probably be asked, why are you interested in an MBA? That's different. Those are two separate questions. But if you're asked, why are you interested in our MBA program? You're going to need to be ready to give specific reasons that do not apply to any other business school. You need to be very focused and let them know that you did your homework, that you know about that program in particular. We also talked about the importance of first impressions. All of us know this. There's a saying, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. That is very true. People without even thinking, we're just made this way as human beings. When we meet someone for the first time, we get an impression of them, and it's usually for better or for worse. And in this situation, you clearly want to make sure you do your best to make a good first impression. Prepare your responses for potential questions. That's the next tip. But do you see what I highlighted there? Do not memorize your answers. You want the idea here, you want to have an idea of the items you're going to cover when that question is asked, but you do not memorize a script. I did this last week. I'm going to do it here briefly. What if, when I first started speaking today, I talked like this? Hello, my name is Dr. Don Martin. I work with Grad School Road Map, and I am very glad to be here. Could you imagine? You would have turned me off in a minute. You would have said, oh my gosh, that is the most boring, uninteresting way of communicating I've ever heard. And you would be right. So keep that in mind. When you're working on the responses to your questions, yes, you want to have an idea and be very clear. If they ask me this, here are 3 things I want to cover, but that's as far as you go. You do not memorize word for word your response. You're going to come across as very, very ill prepared and very almost fake and not yourself. Remember also, you need to go with the flow. Interviewers, everyone's different. We all have our own unique personalities. So interview styles may change a little bit. And you need to be able to adapt and be flexible and deal with the particular style of the interviewer that is working with you. Next, be sure that you don't ramble. Don't go on and on and on. You don't want to provide 1-word responses or 2 words either, but you need to, usually when folks are nervous, I should have added a slide or a point here. Remember, you're probably going to be nervous. That's okay. Eventually, that will calm down as you go through the interview. But initially, you're probably going to be nervous. When we're nervous, most of us talk more rather than less. We ramble. So you need to be careful. You want to answer the questions, but you do not want to go on and on and on and on. Also, make sure you're comfortable talking about both your strengths and perhaps a weakness or weaknesses. Some people are feeling like they're being braggadocious or they're being arrogant if they talk about their strengths. Not in this case, because most likely you were asked to do just that. The interviewer will have said, tell us about something you consider a strength or something you believe you're good at. Or is there anything you'd like to share with us that you're working on in your life, a weakness? We all have them. And if you are not prepared to talk about either one of those, or you're uncomfortable doing so, you need to practice. You need to get more comfortable, because this is likely going to come up in most interviews. And finally, for the interviewee, please make sure you say thank you. Send an email message. My preference is a handwritten thank you note. This is so rare anymore that folks would communicate this way. So when the interview is concluded, send a note or an email. Just the fact that you said thank you, that's most important. How you do it is probably a little less so. But you want to be sure and say thank you. That means a lot to the interviewer, to the admissions committee, that you do so. So that's a quick review of what we covered in last week's webinar. Now, let's shift gears, and we're going to talk about the person interviewing you and what they are thinking and feeling and perhaps going through on their side of the table or the desk or the room when they're interviewing with you. First of all, I'm going to talk about this beforehand. Before they meet you, just so you know, most likely your interviewer is going to be one of three groups: either an actual official member of the admissions staff, or they may be a current student. In the MBA admissions arena, oftentimes second-year MBA students help the admissions committee to interview applicants. So it's possible that you will have a current student be your interviewer, or perhaps a graduate, an alumnus who wants to give back to the school in some way. And this is one of the ways they like to do that, which is to be the one to have the chance to interview you. Now, remember, in terms of the admissions committee, and I can attest to this, I served as an admissions dean for 28 years, whether it was at Chicago Booth, whether it was at Columbia, Northwestern, wherever. The importance of the interview doesn't, or I should say the interview report that is completed after the interview, whether it's from a member of the admissions staff, whether it's from a current student, whether it's from a graduate, doesn't matter. It is equally weighted. There's no difference in the eyes of myself as an admissions dean. It doesn't matter to me who did that interview, because they were trained. Whether it was a student, an alumnus, we train, admissions staffs take this very seriously, and they train their interviewers. This isn't, and the interviewers have to go through a lot of practice interviews before they get to do one for real. So the weight of the report, there will be no difference in if a current student says this applicant is fantastic, that will carry as much weight as if an admissions staff member said it, or an alumnus. So they're weighted the same. Secondly, as I just mentioned, these individuals are trained. No admissions committee would just send an interviewer the name and contact information of an applicant and say, basically, have at it, have fun. Oh, no. This is a very, very closely monitored part of the application process. Lots of training goes into this because it's such an important component of the application. Most of the time, they will have absolutely read your resume before they get in that room or get on a Zoom call with you or whatever it is. They will have absolutely read your resume. Now, we're not so sure about the rest of the application. That very much depends on the business school and how they, or the graduate school, how they decide to do this. In some cases, they may actually have the interviewer look at your entire application, your essays, your recommendation letters, your transcripts, test scores, whatever. In other cases, they will not have them do that. I will just share with you, at Chicago booth, we did not have interviewers look at anything other than the applicant's resume, because we did not want to prejudice them in any way ahead of time. We wanted them to just have this conversation with the candidate and not know much else about them until they met, so that their evaluation would be not biased unduly. So, but some schools do have the interviewer read the application. You will not know which one is happening, but just so you know, behind the scenes, that's what the interviewer is looking at before they meet you. I want to stop and say I'm thrilled. We've already had a question come into the Q&A box. That's excellent. Keep them coming. As I told you before, I love questions. So now let's switch from the interviewer before the interview to the interviewer during the interview. What do we want to talk about here? Several things. You know, I'm going to start with the last point first. I'm going to just jump to that one. If you'll look down to the last bullet point on your screen, what does it say? These interviewers, part of their training is that they want to do everything they can to help you do as well as you can in this interview. This is not something where they're trying to trick you or ask you terribly difficult questions that would be very hard for you to answer without advanced information. Not at all. In my case, when I did interviews, I did some, especially if I traveled overseas representing my institution, Chicago booth, Columbia, Northwestern. My goal was to help that candidate relax as soon as possible so that we could have a genuinely good conversation. That was my goal. And that is the goal of most interviews. This is not about tripping you up and causing you to be really, really terribly nervous. Not at all. They want you to do well. So keep that in mind. Now, along with that, now we'll move to the top of the slide again. Of course, we trained our interviewers. We said, look, you need to remember how it felt for you when you were in this situation. You're nervous. This could be your first choice, the applicant's first choice business school, the one they really want to attend. So they're going to be nervous. They're going to be aware of that. They're going to be fully prepared for the fact that in the beginning, you're going to be a little nervous. That's human nature. There's nothing bad about that. You don't obviously want to show that terribly, but you don't want to completely hide it and act as if, oh, I'm just as confident as I can be. No, you're going to be nervous. Now, once we get that established, as they begin speaking with you, as they begin asking questions, they're going to be mindful of two primary aspects of your communication back with them. First, what you're saying, and second, how you're saying it. Both of these are important. And keep in mind, again, this is to the best of the interviewer's ability. They want to structure this to keep you and help you be calm, because they want to have, the word I like to use is a conversation. It would almost be as if they were having a cup of coffee. You know, in fact, some alumni interviews are conducted in a cafe. The interviewer meets the interviewee in a coffee shop, and they sit, and I like that. I think that's a great way to do it. That if that happens to you, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, because it almost helps to ensure that it'll be more of a relaxed kind of conversation than if you're in an office and you know there's just you and the interviewer with those fluorescent lights overhead. So again, what you say and how you say it, again, not memorized, a bit more conversational, a bit lighter is helpful. They're also going to be observing body language. How are you fully, from the standpoint of just your physical being, your presence? Are you there? Are you looking at, eye contact is absolutely critical. I can't tell you how many times I'd interview a candidate and when I would give them ask them a question, they'd look up at the ceiling, or they'd look over here or over here. They wouldn't look at me. And I wanted to, sometimes, I never did this, but I was tempted to say, I'm right here. Do you see me? I'm right here. I would just not. And again, you don't want to stare, but you absolutely want to maintain that. That calms things down. That lets that interviewer know that you are fully engaged with him or her. And if you're sitting with your arms crossed, now it wouldn't be this exaggerated. I'm doing this because I'm on camera. But if you have your arms crossed, or your legs are crossed, and everything is, that makes it look like you're somehow, and now you don't want to have your arms open wide, nothing like that, but you want to be somewhat relaxed, and you want to sit in that way. Now, in terms of the report that is going to be submitted after this interview has concluded, the interviewer is most likely, when it's all said and done, evaluating 3 components of your candidacy, 3 major aspects of you as a candidate. First, how well do you know that business school? Is it evident that, as I said before, I don't want to belabor this too much, but when you talk about why you want to go to a particular business school, the worst answers you can give are one of these. You have wonderful campus. You have amazing faculty. You have a great alumni network. Your courses are great. That could be said of any business school at all. That is the worst thing you can answer. So they want to know that you did some homework and that there are some specific aspects of that program that do not apply to any other that interested you. Again, secondly, what is your communication style, your body language, your sense of how you communicate with them? Are you somewhat relaxed? Are you reasonably easy to talk with, easy to listen to? Are you engaging? Or are you harsh or overly arrogant or too quiet, or somehow you're not looking at them? You seem to be distant. Those things will not help you. And lastly, obviously, the interviewer is going to be asked, I'm telling you this right now, on the interview report form. I don't care what that report form looks like. They're all different. But I can guarantee you, I'm 99% certain, on every interview report form that's out there, the final question for the interviewer is, what is your recommendation? Is this candidate a match for us? And they get 3 responses that they can check: yes, no, or maybe we need a little more information from them about something. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. We may need to try to get some more information first. That's what they're going to be asked to say. And they're going to be asked to be very honest. And I'm telling you, if an interviewer would indicate at the end of an interview report form, no, this person should not be admitted, they almost never are, ever. When I evaluated applications for Chicago Booth, I looked at the interview report first. If that interviewer said, no, do not take this candidate, they will not do well here, they are not a match for Chicago Booth, 9 times out of 10, they were denied immediately. I didn't go further with the application at that point. It was a done deal. So that is the final, most important question of the report. So that's what's going to be happening kind of during the time this interviewer is actually engaging with you, okay? Now, afterward, you probably know where I'm going to say this, or where I'm going with this, because I've already talked about it. They're going to prepare a report. They will have been asked by the admissions committee to be brutally honest, whether they are singing your praises and they think you are, oh my gosh, I would have some interviewers that would say, we need to provide this student a full ride scholarship. We need them at Chicago Booth. They would be absolutely a wonderful addition. Others, again, it was the other way. Don't touch them with a 10-foot pole. So they're being asked to be completely honest. Now, most likely they're not going to have contact with you again once this is done. And so the only time they might reach out to you is if the admissions committee notifies them that you were admitted, which many admissions committees do. Sometimes interviewers will then reach out to a newly admitted student and say, oh, I recommended you get in. I'm so excited. Please let me know if you'd like to meet for coffee. If you have any questions, I'd love to connect with you. That often can happen, but that's the only contact. After the interview is done, until the notification, there will be no further contact that they will have with you. Now, again, they do appreciate being thanked. There's nothing wrong with that. As we said, a nice handwritten note can go a long way. So that's basic. Once the interview's done, then you should not be reaching out to that interviewer except to thank them. That's it. Now, if there's some sort of extenuating circumstance and you really feel you have a question and they said to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time if something comes up, then you could, but you want to be very careful. Be very careful about interacting with the interviewer between the time the interview has taken place and the time that you are notified of a decision. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'm going to take a quick drink of water and I'll be right back. There we go, that's better. Okay, so we've now covered 3 aspects of what is going on with your interview before, during, and after the meeting takes place. Now, what are some of the questions that you might be asked? There are many. We could never cover all of them right now, but there are 5 that are probably the most often asked questions in an interview, usually. And here they are. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Now, let me give you a clue, and you're going to see this in a minute when we do the mock interview with my colleague, and she serves as the interviewer and I serve as the applicant. When someone asks you to tell them a little bit about yourself, you do not want to repeat what's already on your resume. They already know that. So this is the time to tell them a little, and you'll see what I do with this question. You'll see what I do in a minute, how I deal with this. But this is not the time to respond to them with, I went to this university, I have this degree with this GPA, my GMAT score is this, and then I worked over here for this company and all. No. They know that already. And as you'll see in point number 2, they're going to most likely ask you something about something related to your resume. They're going to ask you a question. They might say, I see here that you spent 2 years at Morgan Stanley. You were in the investment banking group, and you mentioned this particular part of that. I'd like to ask you more about that. That's very likely, but you let them ask you about some part of your resume. That's for them to do. You don't need to recite it again when they ask you that first question. They're almost always going to ask, why are you looking for this why are you interested in this degree program? And why our business school? Why our program specifically? That you can count on that 9 times out of 10. They're also going to ask, as we said, about strengths and weaknesses. What are they? And lastly, some idea about your short and long-term goals. Usually that's not on a resume. And if they're not allowed to read the rest of the application, they'll be asking, although you may have already communicated it in your application, this is the first time they're hearing about it. So these are, now there will be other questions. You can't prepare for every single question that may be asked. We don't have time today to do a full-fledged mock interview of every potential question, but these are some of the most likely questions. And this is what is going to be behind what I'm now very excited to do for the first time. We've never done this in a Grad School Road Map webinar. I'm terribly excited. We're going to have an interview with Dr. Don, with me and one of my colleagues. I'm going to shift the camera here for just a moment so you can meet her. Then I'll put it back to me. I will be looking then at her from that point on as we go through these 5 types of interview questions, with her being the interviewer, me being the applicant. Let me now introduce you to my colleague, Ms. Deborah Zakarian, who recently joined our Grad School Road Map team, a wealth of background, including an MBA. She has an earned MBA herself, so she's been through this process, as many of you are going through it. Debbie, it's great to have you here today. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Dr. Don. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today.
Great. Okay, now we're going to bring the camera back over. Debbie's going to get situated in the place where she would be asking me questions. I'll be looking in the camera, and what you know is that I'll be looking at Debbie. She is now the interviewer. I am the applicant. So here we go.
Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Debbie. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
I am happy to serve as your interviewer today, and then I will file a report about our time together. Well, why don't we start out with you giving me some information about yourself?
Okay, sure. Well, I am originally from the East Coast of the United States. I grew up in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I have 3 older sisters, and as a kid, at times I felt like I had 4 mothers telling me what to do. But the good news was I always had my own bedroom and my own clothes. I've lived in the Midwest, in the Chicago area for many years. I came out there for graduate school, and I've never left, and I love it. And maybe just a couple other things about me. Excuse me. I love to travel. I've been to all 50 states and 64 countries around the world so far. And maybe one thing you absolutely wouldn't know about me is that I love sweets. I absolutely, especially chocolate.
Well, thank you, Don. That's great to hear. And I look at your resume and I noticed that you've had a lot of admissions experience. And I was curious, how did you decide to choose this field?
Well, that's a great question. In some ways, if I'm going to be honest, the field chose me. I was a senior in college, and I didn't really have a complete idea of what it was that I wanted to do with my career. And 3 months before graduation, I got a message that the vice president wanted to see me. And so I went in, and they said, Don, we're creating a position for an admissions counselor here at the school, and we were wondering if you would be interested. And that's exactly what happened. I was very flattered. I wasn't exactly sure what my responsibilities would be, so I asked them. And their first response was, we'll give you a car. And I just remember thinking that was pretty cool, that I'd be graduating from college and have a car. And so anyway, that's how it happened that I ended up getting into admissions work. And I'm so thankful that it worked out that way.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Now, my next question has 2 parts.
Okay.
The first would be, what has caused you to decide to pursue an MBA? And then secondly, what is it specifically about our program that has attracted your interest?
Well, in terms of the first question, my work in admissions has been extremely fulfilling. It's been extremely rewarding. I love it, but I've been doing it now for about 10 years. And I have had an idea about writing a book on the MBA, and maybe more generally, the graduate school application process, and starting my own business, helping students that are navigating this process. And while I feel comfortable and have a relative degree of confidence in my admissions related abilities, I'm really not as familiar with the whole business enterprise. And I believe that some guided, focused study on business, including marketing, including business plans, financing, working with international business, things that I just have no exposure to, would greatly enhance my abilities and hopefully ensure success when I would start this business and write my book. So that's why I'm looking at an MBA in general. In terms of your program, there are two specific reasons that have really piqued my interest. First of all, I've been communicating with Professor Jones for the past year. He's in the entrepreneurship department. And he's written at least 7 books. I've read 2 of them. I've actually sat in on 2 of his classes during 2 campus visits that I've made in the past year. And I've been able to communicate with him, not every week or anything, but every so often, we've actually communicated via email back and forth. And I'm very excited about, if admitted, about the possibility of, he has a lab, an entrepreneurship lab, where he takes second-year students to work with him. I would be absolutely thrilled if that opportunity would present itself. Secondly, you have an overseas program in France, and you actually have students working with startups over there in an educational setting. And I haven't found any other business school that does this. I've spoken with the program director, and I've spoken with 2 students who just participated in this program last semester. And it's absolutely incredible. And there are many others, but those are probably the 2 main reasons, I would say, for my strong interest in this program.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that, Don. Now we're going to get to some questions that you probably knew were coming, because they usually are asked in an interview. But can you just share with me what you feel are some of your strongest assets, and then perhaps something that you might be working on?
Well, I have to say, I did anticipate you might ask me about this. So in terms of assets, for those that, if you would speak with someone that knows me really well, a family member or maybe a close friend, I believe that there are probably 2 or 3 assets they might share if somebody said, what do you like about Don, or what is he good at? I think the first thing they might say is that I am a good communicator. I am able to express myself well in writing and verbally. And whether it's with one person at a time or in a group setting, that I have a good and relaxing and calming communication style. The second asset I believe they might address is that I am a man of my word, that I'm dependable, I'm reliable, I am honest, and if I tell you I'm going to do something, especially as a fellow student, if I were in a project working with a team of my fellow students on something, and we all had to kind of participate in part of that, my friends would probably say that you don't ever have to worry, that you're not going to wonder where Don went or what happened to him or why he isn't communicating, that I am a man of my word and that I'm trustworthy. And a third asset, I don't know that this is something that is as publicly visible, but for whatever reason, I don't know how it happened. I'm just grateful. I am a very organized person. I'm able to organize myself, my time, and get things done, especially in a situation where I'm multitasking. And I'm just thankful about that. In terms of something to work on, how much time do you have? I certainly have my faults. I think one area that has been consistently part of my life in terms of what I've needed to work on is that I can be very impatient. I think because I'm organized, because I consider myself personally to be very efficient, when something doesn't go as quickly as I think it should, or people are being slow, or they're not being organized, or they just are dilly-dallying around or whatever, I get, initially, if I allow myself, I can get very upset and very impatient and start yelling or saying, what's the matter with you? And I've that's happened on occasion. I'm not proud of that, But over several years, this has been brought to my attention, and I'm at a point now where I believe that I'm a little better able to, in the moment that something happens that could trigger one of these episodes of my being impatient, that I'm actually aware that that might be a possibility, and I'm able to step back and say, Don, how are you going to deal with this? Now, this is just a minor example, but recently I took a trip and my luggage was for a period of time, they couldn't find it. And for almost the entire trip, I didn't have any luggage. And I remember when it first occurred to me that my luggage was missing, that I actually had a conversation with myself. Inside my head, it was like, okay, Don, what are you going to do about this? This is something you can't control. Are you going to be impatient and get upset and start yelling at everybody, or what are you going to do? And I was able to, in that moment, choose a different path. Not that it was I wasn't overjoyed, I wasn't thrilled, but I just was able to keep my cool. So that's a work in progress, though. That I wish I could say I do that every time. I don't, but I think I'm getting better at it.
Well, thank you for sharing. And it sounds like you handled that situation very well. We could all, I'm sure, use a little more patience in our lives. Finally, Don, I'd like to ask you what you see yourself doing after the completion of our program, not just right after in the short term, but where you see yourself in the long term and what some of those goals might be.
Well, I thought you would ask that too. So let me share my thoughts. In terms of the short term, the first few years after my MBA, I don't want to start my business immediately, at least not at this moment. Now, I realize once, if admitted, and I have the privilege to join you, maybe while I'm in the program, this could change and I might want to start it immediately. But what I'm thinking more of is either returning to the position I held before, that I'm in now, actually, and spending a couple more years to really hone my business plan and get things up and running, or there are some admission consultancies out there already that are doing some great things. And if they would ever be interested in an intern or an apprentice or someone who would work with them for 2 years, full well knowing that I intend to start my own business at some point, that might be a possibility. One of those two in the short term. In the long term, as I mentioned, I would like to start my own advising service, consulting service for prospective business school and graduate students. I already have an idea of what I might call it, and that is Grad School Road Map. That's the term I'm thinking, or the name I'm thinking of. And I'd like to get my book written, and then, maybe within 2 or 3 years of graduating, actually launch this business. That's where I'm at least at this point.
Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for sharing that and for meeting with me today. And we wish you the best as you pursue graduate studies in your future.
Well, thank you, Debbie. And I'm the one that wants to say thank you, because I am so appreciative that you gave me this opportunity to interview with you. So thanks again. Okay, Debbie, I'm going to turn this over just a minute. Thank you very much. You did a great job as my interviewer. And that is, again, just a bit of an idea of how an interview might work. It looks like we've gotten some more questions as we've been doing this interview. I was hoping we'd have that. So that's excellent. And in a minute, you're going to get a chance to ask them. I hope there will be even more. But just again, keep in mind overall, if you are invited to interview, obviously this means that they are interested in you. And if I could narrow it down to 3 things for you and 3 things for your interviewer, 3 things for you: prepare, relax, and be yourself. Those are probably the 3 overarching suggestions. For the interviewer, they know you're going to be nervous. They just want to have a conversation with you, and they really want you to do well. That's how I would, if I had to really summarize this, those are the things I would say. This is a conversation. It's an opportunity for them to get to know you, and they're definitely interested. And so that's my comments now about our interviewee and interviewer situation. I'm going to quickly mention my book. As you know, in that interview, I was kind of pretending because I've already written the book and I've already started Grad School Road Map. Here's the book, second edition, just released in 2018. If you're interested, you can go on to the Grad School Road Map website. You'll see that in just a minute. And if you type in the promo code GSRM, which stands for Grad School Road Map, you'll get a discount. Obviously, the book is also available on Amazon. I encourage you to check that out. Again, this is my contact information, and I accidentally have another person there that I shouldn't have put on, but you've got my name, my email address, and down below for more information is the Grad School Road Map website address. By the way, we have a phenomenal, in addition to a section on the book, we have an outstanding blog section, over 100 blogs. This is all free information. So you should feel free to take advantage of that. And if you would like to speak with me, you can go onto the website and fill out the contact form to request a free consultation, whether it be that you're interested in some coaching or you would just like to speak with me one-on-one for 30 minutes free of charge. You feel free to do that. I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you. Okay, let's see here. We're just about at 45 minutes. I usually like to leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end of my presentation for questions. Nellie, as you can see, has joined us again. Nellie, one more time, thank you for giving me this incredible opportunity to spend this time with you. I think this was 7 of these we did this year. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for all that you do behind the scenes. You do a yeoman's job of setting these up, preparing for them, marketing them, sending information out after they're completed. Thank you. I hope we can do this again next year, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's focus on the moment at hand. And I think we have at least 6 or 7, whatever, questions so far. I hope more will come in, but I'm going to turn the microphone over to you now to answer any of the questions that we have.
Thank you, Don. First, thank you for the nice words. And thank you, Debbie. It was really interesting to watching you two having this mock interview. Really exciting. Indeed, we received a few questions and I'm going to jump right in.
Okay.
Okay, starting from the beginning, is there any way to find out who is going to interview me beforehand?
That's a great question. Yes and no. In some cases, you will not be told. They may even say, you will be interviewed by one of these following individuals. So, and that's all you'll find out. And if that's all they tell you, you should accept that. You don't write back to them and say, please tell me which one. You just, whatever the information they give, that's what you'll have. In other cases, they may actually give you the name and the particular type of individual this is, an alumnus, a student. It's more likely that you will not know exactly who it is, but it's possible. That's a great question.
Thank you, Don. And more on the preparation. Can you give tips, please, on how to prepare for the interview in a way so I could sound confident when I answer the questions?
That's a great question. Now, in last week's webinar, we took a whole section of our time and we talked all about this. One of the slides at the top, it just said, prepare. And then we gave you some information. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at that webinar. I know Unimi Prep makes it available. So if you have specific questions, maybe you can put a message in the Q&A box for Nellie right now, asking how to access this. But just to give you something, the best way to prepare is, I think, at least in 2 ways. Making sure you are very clear about that business school and why you want to be there. You need to know about that program inside and out. That's the first. The second is that you have not memorized, but rehearsed your responses. That there, again, there's a difference. You You don't memorize word for word. You don't write it down. I'm going to say this. That will hurt you. But what you do write down are some bullet. If they ask me, why am I interested in this program? Here are 3 bullet points. These are the things I want in my head to remember. That's what I want to cover. In all honesty, your answers to those questions should be different every time if you do it right. There'll never be 2 identical answers because you didn't memorize. They'll be different every time. Great question.
Thank you very much, Don. And while you are speaking, I pasted a link to the last week's webinar so everyone can check it.
Wonderful. Oh, that's a great idea. Thank you, Nom.
Okay, next question. What do we do when the interviewers, are still looking or reading our resume? Can we start a conversation with them?
Let me make sure I understood the question. Was the question if the interview has actually begun and the interviewer is reading the resume right in front of the applicant, would it be appropriate for the applicant to start a conversation at that time or begin to talk? Have I gotten that right?
Yeah, I think that's the question, exactly.
All right. I would strongly recommend, that's a very good question, by the way, and it shows again that you want to do the right thing here. I would strongly recommend that you not engage in conversation now, I would think it would only be right that the interviewer has seen your resume before they get in that room with you. If they're doing that, then they didn't do their part. That's on them. However, if that's the case, I would suggest you not engage in conversation with them. Let them finish reading your resume, and I would be 99% certain that when they do, they will then engage you in conversation.
Thank you very much, Don.
Yep.
Another question, is it okay to laugh during the interview?
That's a great question. Is it okay to laugh? Well, one thing I didn't say this week that I said last week for the interviewees, you can smile, and you should. When you meet the person initially, you may have noticed in my mock interview, when Debbie asked me a certain question, I smiled a little bit because either I knew it was coming, I'd prepared for it, or and so but you don't want to laugh just for the sake of laughing. If the interviewer says something that you think is really funny, sure, you can. Now, you don't want to break out into some, you don't want to be over the top. But if it's funny and you can definitely smile and you can have a brief laugh in the moment if you think now you don't want to be overly humorous yourself. You don't want to be cracking jokes in this interview. But if the interviewer says a kind of a little joke or a little mantra or something that's kind of funny, sure, you could laugh a little bit. I see no reason that you couldn't. Good question.
Thank you very much, Don. Okay, now we have another more serious question.
Okay.
What is the best answer to the question, what are some of your strengths and weaknesses, especially the weaknesses?
All right. I don't know if this person had a chance to watch our mock interview, during which time Debbie actually asked me that question, that very question. What I believe can be helpful is that you try to imagine if someone was talking to your mother or father or siblings or your partner or one of your best friends, and they said, please tell me, let's say it was Nellie, what are some of Nellie's most endearing attributes? What are the things about her you really like? That's what you would want to say. And you want to give one or two, and you could do what I did in the mock interview. You could say, well, if you were talking with a member of my family or a friend of mine, I think they might say that here are some things about me that are really strong points. And then when you get to your weaknesses, please know they're not looking to know every mistake you've made and some deep, dark secret. We all have a past. We all have things in the United States, we call it skeletons in the closet. We all have skeletons in the closet. They're not asking you to open that door and tell them all the deep, dark secrets of your life. Absolutely not. But they also want to be aware that you're not perfect, that we all have things that we need to work on. And so you want to choose something. Are you an impatient? One of the other, I talked about impatience when I answered Debbie's question, but something else that is something I have to work on is I can be very opinionated, and I can gather my opinions and thoughts about something. And sometimes it can be so much so that don't talk to me. I'm right. That's it. No further discussion. Now, there may be times when there isn't anything else to discuss, but you need to be very careful. If you're that opinionated all the time, that could turn people off from ever wanting to talk to you about anything. So again, those are the kinds of things. Some people procrastinate. That's another one I used to hear. Some people are not as organized as I am, and they wait till the last minute. And sometimes that can be, it doesn't ruin their life, but it can be difficult. So those are the kinds of things I think you'd want to talk about if you're addressing a weakness.
Thank you very much, Don. Tell us, what are the personalities that the interviewers are looking for?
I am sorry, did you add, what are the attributes that they're looking for? Was that the word?
I would say the personalities. What kind of personalities?
What are the personalities? Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that I would say the interviewer is looking for a particular personality type, but more than that, I think I mentioned earlier, what they want to get a sense of is just how you communicate. Are you an open person? Are you easy to talk with? Are your responses informational, informative, but relaxed? Are you engaging with that interviewer? Are you looking at them? Are you fully present in the moment? And if it's an alumnus or a student or even an admissions staff member, is this the kind of person that students would want to be around, that they would be comfortable interacting with? Those are the kinds of things they're trying to assess in this interview, in this conversation with you.
Thank you, Don. And we have 2 more questions and just a few minutes left. So let's see if we can cover them quickly.
Okay, good.
Okay, can it happen that I'm contacted after the interview for some follow-up questions?
Can you contact the interviewer after to ask some follow-up questions?
I think it's the opposite. Is it happening that the interviewers are contacting the candidates?
Oh, the interviewers, is it possible that the interviewer, I would say that is extremely unlikely. It could have happened, but I don't recall any instance where an interviewer reached out to an applicant after the fact. I think that's highly unlikely. Now, it is possible that an interviewer might say to an applicant, if you have any questions after this interview, if something comes up, please feel free to reach out to me. If they invite you to do that, you could do that once, just once, but it better be a really important question that somehow, if they get the impression that you're just trying to add a little bit of opportunity to communicate with them after the interview, and it's a really unnecessary question that you can answer for yourself, that's going to hurt you. It better be a very good question, and that's very rare also. Like I said, most of the time, there will be no contact with the interviewer after the interview has concluded.
Thank you very much. And one last question.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the dress code and etiquette during the interview? Sure,
good question. The dress code should be specified in your interview notification. That 9 times out of 10, they will be telling you when the interview is going to be taking place, where, how, whether it's, if you're going in person, if you're going virtual, what the length, the amount of time that you'll have for the interview. And I would be at 99% sure they're going to tell you what the dress code is. But if they don't, as you can see, if there's any gentlemen on the call today, I'm wearing a formal what I'd call a very nice light sweater, very formal, button down here in the front with collars. I don't have a t-shirt on. I'm not wearing a sweatshirt. Or the last thing you want to do is wear a t-shirt with the name of the business school on it. Absolutely not. This is not the time for rah-rah Duke, rah-rah Kellogg. No. You want to have a very nice professional, a button-down shirt. You most likely do not need a tie for guys. For girls, for women, a nice blouse. You don't have to have a suit jacket on. Nellie looks very, very entirely appropriately dressed for this occasion for an interview. But you're going to be told pretty clearly what the dress expectations would be.
Thank you very much, Don. I think it's the first time that we went over 1 hour, but it was really, really interesting session today.
This was great. This is a great way to close out this series. How about it?
Indeed. Okay, we have no more questions, so it just left for me to thank you again and thank you everyone for joining us today. As always, we wish you best of luck in your academic journey. Thank you, Don. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.